So, hello there, allow me to introduce myself. My name is David Humphrey. I'm here to tell you about the ACT Science, or at least sample through the ACT Science exam through some sample questions of you. So, when it comes to teaching, I have a few general ideas about what teaching means and what you should do when you teach. So, I believe that you should first start off by lecturing about a topic. Then, you should show some example problems. After all, they are assigned an assignment, and it would be best if you could demonstrate how to solve an individual problem from the assignment, and afterwards then you let them do the work in class. So yeah, that's how you go about it. So it should be explained that there are three academic types of problems on the ACT science section of the exam. So the first of these three types is data representation. So you see data and they want you to interpret it and understand what it's saying to you. Second is research summary. You will see a sample of a particular research done in the test question, and you're to answer what happened during the exam, what happened during the research to cause uh, the result of the scientific problem. And then the third type is conflicting viewpoints. So oftentimes when you do a problem and when you do an experiment in science, you might have something that conflicts with what you previously thought was true. So how do we know what's true and what's not? Well, the understanding conflicting viewpoints will help us determine what that would be. So there are three academic types of problems. Let's go through the problems and see what type each of the passages adhere to. There are 6 passages overall. There should be 2 then of each. Okay, let's see for passage 1. The figure below is a pedigree that shows the inheritance of a trait G, in a family. The presence of trait G is in an individual is determined entirely by gene G. Gene G has 2 alleles, capital G, which is dominant, and little g, which is recessive. Each individual represented in the pedigree was assigned a number shown below by a symbol for the individual. For reference, scientists determined that the gene G genotype of individual 20 is little g, and that the gene G genotype of individual 21 is capital G, little g. Based on this information, the science concluded that trait G is a recessive trait. Now, which of the 3 types is this? Well, knowing what the 3 academic types are, we can determine that this is data representation. So the data is shown in the graph below and is represented and shown to the student on the sheet, and as such refers to data representation. Now let's look at passage 2. See what this adheres to. Heliconia metallica is a plant found in the understory of tropical rainforests. The understory is the area below the forest canopy. H. metallica flowers are normally pollinated by hummingbirds. The flowers can be self-pollinated. Egg and pollen are from the same H. metallica plant, or cross-pollinated. Egg and pollen are from different egg and pollen are from different H. metallica plants. The following study was conducted to investigate the effects of different pollinated treatments on fruit production and seed mass in a population. Study. Before pollination could occur, the anthers pollen-producing structures were removed from each of 400 H. metallica flowers. Then the flowers were covered with nylon bags to prevent the normal pollinators from pollinating the flowers. The covered flowers were divided equally into 4 groups, groups 1 through 4, and each group received a different pollination treatment. See Table 1. 4 weeks after the pollination treatments, the percent of flowers that produced fruit and the average mass per seed were determined for each group. See figures 1 and 2 respectively. Table 1. Group pollination treatment. Group 1, self-pollination. Group 2, cross-pollination with pollen's collection from a single donor, H. metallica plant. 3. Cross-pollination with a mixture of pollen collected from 6 donor H. metallica plants. Group 4, no pollination. Asterisk, each flower was pollinated with pollen from its removed anthers. We see figure 1 and figure 2 below. We're not going to, we can't read those. So then you get the questions. So, which of the types is it? It is type 2, the research summary. So you see here a bunch of research was done, as shown by the graphs figure 1 and figure 2. A lot of research done, and you see the results there below, and your goal as a scientist is to interpret what the research shows you. And the questions shown here. The questions shown here ask for your interpretation of the research. Let's look at passage 3. Passage 3. When 2 types of bacteria... So let's look at passage 3. When 2 types of bacteria found in the soil of a wetland, land having a high water table, break down organic matter, gases are generated. Aerobic bacteria, which requires O2, generate CO2. Anaerobic bacteria, which require little or no O2, generate CH4, methane. Study. At the beginning of a particular summer, 3 soil sections, each 1.5 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 0.6 meters deep, were removed intact from the surface of each of two wetlands, a bog and a fen. After all live plants had been removed from the sections, each section was placed in a separate 100-liter tank having sides and a lid made entirely of glass. An instrument to measure gas emissions was mounted on the underside of the lid, above the soil. All the tanks were placed at an outdoor site near the wetlands. Different amounts of water were added to the 3 tanks containing bog soil sections to produce a water table, water 1 centimeter above the surface, 1 centimeter above the surface plus 1 centimeter of the first soil section, a WT water table 10 centimeters below the surface, negative 10 centimeters, of the second soil section, and a WT 20 centimeters below the surface, negative 20 centimeters, of the third soil section. This procedure was repeated for the 3 tanks containing fen soil sections. All the lids were then closed. Over the next 3 months, gas emissions from each soil section were measured in moles of carbon per square meter, moles C per m squared. Throughout this period, the temperature inside the tanks was kept the same as the outdoor temperature. Figure 1 shows the total emission of the CO2 and the total emission of CH4, methane, from each bog soil section due to bacterial activity. Figure 2 does the same for each fen soil section. Here's figure 1 and figure 2. So you see 2 sets of data. What does that mean for what this section is? Of the 3 academic types, it represents the conflicting viewpoints. We see bog soil, fen soil, what occurs on them conflict in terms of viewpoints, and it is the conflicting viewpoint type. Now let's look at passage 4. Passage 4. Physics students performed 3 studies to determine the forces that several doors exerted on their hinges. The doors had viscous weights W and width D. Each door had 2 hinges. The hinges could be moved to vary the distance S between them. None of the doors had a doorknob. The 2 hinges on each door were equidistant from the center of mass of the door. See the diagram. There's a diagram there. Each hinge was fitted with 2 force sensors, with the door attached to a door frame. One of the sensors detected the horizontal force exerted by the door on the hinge FH, and The other sensor detected the vertical force exerted by the door on the hinge FV. Once FH and FV were determined for each hinge FH was averaged over the two hinges, yielding average horizontal force per hinge FH, and FV was averaged over the two hinges, yielding the average vertical force per hinge FV average. From FH average and FV average, the average net force per hinge Fn could be calculated. In the three studies, all forces were recorded in pounds lb, and all lengths were recorded. Study 1. For a door with W equals 61 pounds and D equals 30 inches, the students determined FH average and FV average at various S. The results are shown in figure 1. There are the results. Study 2. For 3 doors, each width D equals 30 inches, but a different W the students determined Fn average at various S. The results are shown in figure 2. Figure 2 shown below. Study 3. For 3 doors, each width W equals 61 lb, but a different D, the students determined Fn average at various S. The results are shown in figure 3. They're the results. Okay, so which of the 3 types of problem is this? This is research summary, as research was conducted and graphs shown here. Study 1, Study 2, Study 3, the studies are research, and that is the type of problem this is. Now let's look at another problem. Passage 5. In a chemistry class, the teacher placed 0.5 grams of porous steel wool, composed mostly of iron, Fe, inside small heat-resistant quartz tube. She then used silicone hoses to connect the quartz tube to 2 airtight glass syringes. See figure. Each syringe contained 8 milliliters of air, and the total volume of air in the closed apparatus was 20 milliliters. See the figure below? Figure adapted from Francisco Vera, Rodrigo Rivera, and Cesar Nunez. A simple experiment to measure the contents of oxygen in the air using heated steel wool. Copyright 2011, blah, blah, blah. A Bunsen burner was then used to heat the contents of the quartz tube for 2 minutes. During heating, the plungers were moved up and down to pass the air back and forth through the steel wool. The total volume of gas in the apparatus steadily declined over the 2 minutes. Once the apparatus and its contents returned to room temperature, the total volume of gas in the apparatus was 16 milliliters. The teacher asked each of 4 students to explain what occurred during the demonstration. Student 1. During heating, the iron in the steel wool reacted with all the nitrogen gas in the air to form solid iron nitride, FeN, which was deposited on the steel wool. Air contains about 20% nitrogen gas by volume. As a result of the reaction, the total volume of gas in the apparatus decreased by about 20%, so almost all the gas remaining in the apparatus was O2. Student 2. During heating, the iron in the steel wool reacted with some of the O2 in the air to form solid iron oxide, Fe2O3, which was deposited on the steel wool. Air contains about 80% oxygen by volume. As a result of the reaction, the total volume of gas in the apparatus decreased by about 20%. Almost all the gas remaining in the apparatus was a mixture of about 75% oxygen and 25% nitrogen by volume. Student 3. Student 2 is correct, except that the Fe ion in the steel wool reacted with all the oxygen in the air, and 2, air contains about 20% oxygen by volume. After the reaction, almost all the gas remaining in the apparatus was nitrogen. Student 4. During heating, the iron in the steel wool reacted with all the carbon dioxide in the air to form solid iron carbonate, FeCO3, which was deposited on the steel wool. Air contains about 20% CO2 by volume. As a result of the reaction, the total volume of the gas in the apparatus decreased by about 20%, so almost all the gas remaining in the apparatus was O2. Okay, now what type of problem is this? Well, we see here that student 1 through student 4, neither of them have points that necessarily agree with one another, at least not in every single way. So these are conflicting viewpoints. The viewpoints with each of what they solved and what they got as a result conflict with one another, and we need to figure out how to interpret the result that they got from this experiment. Okay, let's move on to the final problem. Passage 6. Quarks constitute one of the 3 classes of elementary particles that form all matter in the universe. 3 quarks bound together form a type of particle called a baryon. A quark's effective mass when bound to other quarks is greater than its single quark mass when unbound. In addition, all quarks possess a property called spin. A quark's spin can be oriented in one of two directions, spin up or spin down. Table 1 lists the symbol, electric charge, and approximate single quark mass for each of the 6 quarks. There's table 1 there. Table 2 gives the symbol, mass, quark content, and quark spins for several baryons. Table 2 shown that. Okay. Now, which of the 3 types is this? Well, seeing as we had research summary and conflicting viewpoints occur twice, the third academic type must have its type shown here, which was data representation. We see here a table in data 1 and table 2, and your job as a student is to interpret what table 1 and table 2 both mean in answering the questions. Now let's do one of the problems. Now let's do one of the problems and sample how to get the answers. So we have here a sample problem from the ACT, example of the science test here. So let's go about the problem. Passage 1. The figure below is a pedigree that shows the inheritance of a trait G, in a family. The presence of trait G in an individual is determined entirely by gene G. Gene G has 2 alleles, G, which is dominant, and little g, which is recessive. Each individual represented in the pedigree was assigned a number shown below the symbol for the individual. For reference, scientists determined that the gene G genotype of individual 20 is little g, and that the gene G genotype of individual 21 is big G, little g. Based on this information, the scientists concluded that trait G is a recessive trait. So we have here 1, 2 first generation, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 second generation, third generation, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and of course fourth generation, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, let's look at our problems, what our problems would be. Problem 1. How many generations are shown in the figure? Well, generation 1 is 1, 2, generation 2 is blah blah, so we have 4 lines, 4 horizontal lines. Each horizontal line is a generation. So we can determine that since there are 4 horizontal lines of organisms, there are 4 of them, so the answer is B, 4. Based on the figure, the 2 individuals in which of the following pairs most likely have the greatest genetic similarity across their genomes? So let's look at the answers, possible answers. F, individual 3 and individual 4. So we see here individual 3 and individual 4 are mates, but we see that one has a white box, and the other is a black circle. So the white and the black mean one has the genotype, the other does not. So we know that that answer is not right. G, individual 12 and individual 13. So let's see here. We see two white circles for individual 12, individual 13. Essentially, they are brother and sister. They share the same fact that they do not have the trait. So that must be the right answer, but let's check the other answers to make sure that G is the right answer. H, individual 16 and individual 24. So we see here individual 16, here a black square, and individual 24 a white circle. So they aren't similar in their gender, although they're similar in having the trait, so that's not the right answer either. So individual J, individual 18 and individual 21. So we see here 18 is the circle, the black circle, individual 21 is the white circle. Though they are the same shape, they do not share the same trait, so that is not the right answer either. The only right answer was G, individual 12 and individual 13. So let's go on to the next problem. 3. Suppose that individual 23 and individual 24 have 4 biological children. Based on the figure, how many of the children, if any, have trait G? So, big G, that is. Well, actually, at least we think it's... So, with trait G, I'm sorry I messed up there. So, if you are entirely black, you have trait G. So, we have here 23 recessive gene, 24 recessive gene. So, how many of the children will have the recessive gene? Well, let's take, do consider the fact that recessive gene, little g mates with little g, 23, 24. So if they have 4 children, all 4 will have the recessive gene because there is no dominant gene to make it up. So little g is in every one of the traits. The answer is D, 4. 4. According to the figure, how many of the grandchildren of individuals 1 and individual 2, if any, have trait G? So the answers are 0, 1, 2, and 7 possible answers. So which of the answers is correct? So how many of the grandchildren of individual 1 and individual 2? So we see here that individual 1, individual 2, the grandchildren is line 3 here, since line 2 is the line 2 is the children, and then the grandchildren, the next generation after that, is lines 9 through 16. So you see here 3 blacks and 4 whites. So, but we see that 3 blacks, but we don't have 3 as a possible answer. We have 0, 1, 2, and 7. Why is this? Well, do consider that the grandchild has to be directly related to 1 and 2. 16 is directly related to 1 and 2. That is one of the answers. And we see here that 10 is directly related to 1 and 2. But 10 mates with 9, a recessive gene holder. But 9 is not a grandchild of 1 and 2 because there is no relation between individual 9 and individuals 1 and 2. So 2 must be the correct answer. H. Let's take a look at the other side. 5. Based on the figure, it is likely that trait G is a sex-linked trait. Is it likely that trait G is a sex-linked trait? Let's go through the answers. A. Yes, because the mother with trait G always passed trait G to their sons. B. Yes, because mothers with trait G did not always pass trait G to their sons. No, because mother with trait G always passed trait G to their sons. And D. No, because mothers with trait G did not always pass trait G to their sons. Now, it is important to note that there are two answers that don't make any grammatical sense at all. B and C. With trait G, did not always pass trait G to their sons. Well, trait G is the dominant trait, so sorry, it's the recessive trait. With trait G, and C does not make any sense either. The answer must be D. No, because mothers with trait G did not always pass trait G to their sons. Because when you have the recessive trait, you don't always pass it to your sons. Let's look at answer 6. 6. Based on the information provided, will an individual with the gene G genome, big G, little g, have trait G? F. Yes, because trait G is a dominant trait. G. Yes, because trait G is a recessive trait. H. No, because trait G is a dominant trait. And no, because trait G is a recessive trait. Now, if you remember, the answer must be G or J, because trait G is determined to be a recessive trait as the explanation gave to us. But will they always have trait G? The answer is no, J, because the trait G is the recessive trait. Recessive trait is not always given. That you need to understand, I suppose, and that is how you might go through a science problem on the ACT test.